you get when you spend $75,000 on a mapping drone? Find out in today's episode. Hey guys, Dylan here. Welcome back to another drone video. This is a pretty cool video. Behind me here, I've got a Phase 1 100 megapixel camera on my M300 that we got a little bit ago, and then we're going to be comparing it with the DJI X5S on the Inspire 2, which is a 20 megapixel camera. Basically, we'll be doing a bunch of mapping missions for orthomosaics and inspections on properties for asphalt. So I thought this was a really great opportunity. Thanks to the guys over at Phase 1 for letting me borrow the camera for an entire week. This total package is $56,000 for the camera and lens versus this guy over here, which is about $15,000 all in. So you could buy 3 of these drones with one of these guys right here. But anyways, we're gonna go ahead and get into this video, and let's get flying. Alright, before I get this guy up in the air and flying, let me kind of explain why someone would need a 100 megapixel camera when shooting orthomosaics. When you're trying to get really clear photography in orthomosaic speak, you need to fly really low to the ground. And obviously there's some challenges with that. There's obstacles that you can run into, you may lose sight of the drone, so there's all kinds of different hurdles that you have to get over if you're trying to get a really low pixel per inch for your orthomosaics. So basically how this comes into play is we can fly at like 400 feet with an 80mm lens that's on here. It's a medium format camera, and we can get 0.26 of an inch per pixel, which is incredible quality. And if we drop that all the way down to 200 feet, you can basically see ants crawling into the ground, which is incredible. What that also helps with is less flight time. You're able to cover a whole lot more acreage per flight when you're flying a whole lot higher with a zoomed in lens while still maintaining high quality images versus flying with a very low altitude, say 60 feet with a Mavic 2 Pro. You're going to spend hours upon hours at a time trying to produce that high image, high quality orthomosaic. So what this is basically going to help me do is, I'm actually at one of our clients' properties right now. It's about 600,000 square feet for the actual shopping center, but we have to scan all of the pavement, kind of what you see behind me, but plus 40 times more of this. We're going to be able to capture all of the pavements of this entire property in a fraction of the time that it would take with a regular drone, which would take about 5.5 hours to do. With that being said, let's go ahead and get this guy up in the air. I'm also going to get the Inspire 2 with the X5S up in the air and fly at a similar altitude, and we're just gonna go ahead and compare what they look like later on in the video. Well, I was going to fly it, but without fail, DJI always has an update whenever you need to fly. So that's what we're doing right now, waiting for this guy to update because he's stubborn. Meanwhile, the other guy is doing his thing right now, flying, actually almost done with his mission. So this one's going to be flying, the other one's going to be landing here very shortly. So let's get into the specs of this Phase 1 camera here. This one specifically is the iXM-100. The pixel size is 11,664 by 8,750, and the actual sensor size is almost 44 millimeters by 33 millimeters. What's also cool about this camera system is Phase 1 actually develops their own lenses, so you have an array of lenses to choose from, all the way from a 35 millimeter going up to a 300 millimeter. And what's really cool about this one in specific is it's the 80 millimeter, but it's the autofocus variant. This little box above the camera here is laser, and that laser spits out the distance. It's pretty much similar to LiDAR, so that's how the camera does its autofocus with that laser there. what are the use cases for a payload like this? Why do I need 100 megapixels? Well, to be honest, I don't really need it, but it's definitely a nice to have. It allows us to map properties a whole lot quicker. My industry is all commercial and industrial real estate. We do a lot of mapping missions for over 80,000 properties across the US. So we typically fly with a Mavic 2 Pro or Phantom 4 Pro, and the issue with that is, we have to fly pretty high because some of these areas have a lot of obstruction. Some of them are in the hillside. Some of them are industrial parks, so there's tons of power lines running all over the place. So trying to fly beneath 150 feet is pretty difficult sometimes. And especially with what our clients are requesting in terms of the GSD, which is what I talked about a little bit earlier. They want a very crisp image, a very crisp orthomosaic output of their property so that they can use it for creating reports on their rooftops and their pavement quality. So, a system like this, it essentially erases all of the obstacles that you run into when trying to fly low and capture very high quality images. This will pretty much beat everything out of the sky. But the only issue is that it's just so expensive that it's really hard to implement into an entire fleet of pilots. So that's kind of why we fly with Inspire 2s and some of the other drones. But for the special use cases, when our clients are asking for a very specific, a very high quality orthomosaic, we'll always jump to this to provide that kind of quality. Some of the other use cases outside of my industry for just doing basic mapping missions that we typically do, well, this is used a lot in the energy sector. These drones are being put out in the field to go and capture very high quality images of bridges, towers, power lines, all kinds of different utilities, communication devices out there in order to do very high quality inspections. With a drone like this and throwing a 300mm lens on there, you could be 200-300 feet away, but basically get pretty much right up inside of whatever you're trying to take an inspection photo of. And being able to use technology in a platform like this has helped save lots of time, lots of man hours, and actually has improved a lot of safety for a lot of people out in the field, as opposed to having to climb a 2,000-foot tower or suspend yourself underneath a bridge. You're able to put this in front of a life that is not replaceable. You can always replace a drone, but you can't replace a life. So that's kind of why these two different tools here have been such a big impact in the energy and mapping sector, because they just take a whole lot less time to do, and they're very cost effective in terms of what you're trying to output in terms of inspection quality or very high quality images in those different fields. So before you go out and spend $75,000 on not just the payload here, but also the drone that needs to fly the payload, you gotta think to yourself, the cost versus the time of trying to output a very high quality orthomosaic or whatever you're trying to do. For us, it's hard to implement this across the entire fleet of pilots that we have. We're sitting at about 75 to 100 pilots at a time. So we can't go out and spend $75,000 times 75 pilots. It's just not feasible. For us, we only use this for special occasions, when the time calls for it and also when the client pays for it. Also, it's very interesting for a platform like this, like what I was talking about a little bit earlier. We are doing a very specific use case of capturing very high quality orthomosaics that are about 0.22 inches per pixel, which is a very high quality orthomosaic for those of you that don't go out and do that yourself. We're using that specifically for doing pavement assessment. Now, the challenge with trying to get a very high GSD in those numbers, or at least in that number range, is you have to fly very, very, very low. For the company that we have partnered up with that is actually doing the inspections and the reporting based off of our flight missions that we fly, they wanted us to fly at 60 to 70 feet off the ground. Most of you know that a lot of trees and a lot of poles and power lines are in that 60 to 70 foot range, so it was a very hard challenge for us to overcome. So what we basically did was, for our massive properties that threw it into Drone Deploy or any mapping software that you may have, we threw in the entire property into it, and it basically showed us that we would have to fly for 6 to 7 hours in the day to capture these properties. So what we did is it would have cost us thousands of dollars to go and do that. So we decided to lean on this platform, the Phase 1 100 megapixel platform, to go and assist with capturing very high quality orthomosaics that only took us 45 minutes as opposed to 6 to 7 hours of flying. To us, that saves us a lot of time, a lot of money, and just overall just produces a better orthomosaic for our clients to use when creating inspection and reports for the asphalt. So it really kind of just depends on your use case and if it's going to help either save you time and money or one or the other. It all depends on your use case. So for us, it was no brainer. For others, it's out of the realm of possibility. So before we get into the pros and cons of having a system like the Phase 1 camera, I want to jump in onto the desktop here and kind of show the differences between having that Phase 1 and not having it, aka using the X5S. So here I have pulled up a side-by-side image, or images I should say. On the left-hand side here I have the Phase 1, and then on the right-hand side I have the X5S. These were both captured the same day, obviously not the exact same time. As you can see, when the car is not in the Phase 1 photo like it is in the X5S. But basically I just wanted to show how much more quality of an image the Phase 1 is compared to the X5S. Now granted, yes, the X5S is a fraction of the cost of that 100 megapixel sensor from Phase 1, but still I figure this would just be a good representation of what you can expect. So looking here at the Phase 1, I'm gonna just go ahead and zoom in just a little bit here, just so that we can see the sidewalk, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the same exact thing on the X5S. As you can already see, the Phase 1 retains a whole lot more information. You can really see all these little divots in the pavement here, I should really say on the curb here, as opposed to what's on the X5S. It's a little bit more muddier, it's not as clear. You can't really pick out the details that you can in the Phase 1. Now for most people, everyday stuff, X5S, solid camera, no complaints at all. This is more than enough for most people. But when it comes to doing real inspections and getting really the full picture of what's going on the site, this is where this camera literally blows everything else out of the water. Yes, it's more expensive. I know I keep hitting on that, but it just comes down to the quality of the image. And I'm gonna go ahead and even zoom in more. I mean, you can even tell this right here, there's a little piece of grass coming up. Sure, you can kind of tell here, but this is just so blurry. You can't, it just looks like a little bit of a shadow. Here you can actually really tell what's going on. Now, I actually went in and cropped the Phase 1 photo from the full image. This is a cropped in view of it. This is what that full view looks like right here. This is the full image, the full raw image of what I got from the Phase 1. So I'm zoomed in probably 200% on that sidewalk area. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I can just zoom in essentially for days. You can, I mean, like someone left their Starbucks cup here. Whereas if I go and look at the full image on the X5S, yeah, you can see that, but look how muddy that gets almost immediately. What I'll do is I'll zoom out a little bit. Yeah, it's pixely, but just look at the difference here in quality. I mean, it's crazy. And this Phase 1 camera was flown at 375 feet. The X5S was at 220 feet. Sure, I could have dropped the X5S down, to 100 feet and I would have gotten a clearer image. I also could have done the exact same thing with the Phase 1, but really what I wanted to harp on and reiterate of why a system like this would matter in what I am doing, it just boils down to the flight time. To capture the orthomosaic that I got for this small segment just to test this out, it only took me 15 minutes. Whereas to capture with the X5S, it took me 35 minutes. So you multiply that with all of the missions that get ran in a day, you're going to save a ton of time, ton of money, and you're just gonna be able to output work and inspections and just very high quality work so much faster, as opposed to running with the X5S system. Now let's go ahead and get into the pros and the cons of the Phase 1 100 megapixel camera. So what are the pros of owning a system like this? Well, for one, it's pretty damn cool to have, not gonna lie. You show up to a site with this drone and everyone is turning their heads, dropping their jaw and saying, wow, that thing's huge. But in reality, it does help us a lot in terms of creating those very high quality orthomosaics, as well as just some other things that we've been experimenting with. There's some other top secret projects that we're working on that we're leaning on this platform to help us with creating higher fidelity, higher quality images to create better reports on just some of the different platforms that we're playing with. One of the other pros of a system like this is Phase 1, they actually make a kit that fits directly on the M300. So if you already have an M300, all you have to do is search up the P3 payload from Phase 1. It's essentially plug and play, as you saw earlier in the video when I was assembling it. All you have to do is just swap out a few different brackets and throw the payload on there, and it works like a dream. There's no configuration, there's no remapping, all kinds of different stuff. It just works. It just works as another gimbal, as another system on the M300 platform. So it's perfect for those of you that have a system like this. And then I think one of the last pros for me is just the time savings on sites when capturing orthomosaics or just in terms of mapping in general. Like I said, there's a property that would have taken us 6 to 7 hours to fly if we were using a regular system like a Mavic 2 or Phantom 4 Pro. With this, it only took us 45 minutes, which is an immense time savings, as well as just money savings overall. That's less time that we have to pay people to sit out in the field, babysit the drone, watch it do its thing. You know, I was able to show up, use 2 sets of batteries, and be done for the entire day. I actually went and shot 3 or 4 other properties that same day with this system here because I didn't necessarily need this one. So, you know, at the end of the day, for me, it was a huge pro because it saved us a lot of time, a lot of money, and overall, it's just a no-brainer system to have if that's what you're doing day to day. Now, let's get into the cons. I think the number one con here is just the cost of it, right? Buying an X5S or an X7 that you can go ahead and already throw on an M300 is only gonna cost you about $2,500 to about $3,500. Whereas this entire system right here is a little over $56,000 plus the actual system that you have to fly it with, which puts us right at about $75,000. So that is definitely a big con, but if you do have jobs that can pay very high in terms of just doing orthomosaics or inspections or just anything along those lines, then this is the perfect system for you. Otherwise, if you're just doing very basic orthomosaic or just any basic mapping missions with the drone, your Phantom 4 Pro or your Inspire 2 is going to be just fine. Another con is, well, just the sheer factor of having something like this flying at 400 feet or lower, right? If this thing falls out of the sky, it's not very easy to replace something like this. You got to go through insurance, you got to go through the claims, you got to go through the entire process of getting a system like this back up and running. Whereas the Inspire 2 or any of the other drones below in the DJI lineup, those are super easy. You go to Best Buy, you can order from B&H, Amazon, or Adorama, and you can have the drone to you overnighted. So if you have any accidents that happen out in the field, trying to get another system back out there up and running very quickly is not really a possibility with this unless you buy more than one system, which then goes right back to point number one of a con of how expensive it is. But again, if you're spending the money on something like this, then you definitely have a use case and you can probably afford more than one. And then for me, I think the last con, and this is kind of me coming from a production background, I've had all the fancy cameras, I've had the Red, I've had all those really cool cameras to play with, and one of the cons that always derives from something like that is just storage. Storage is not cheap. You have to buy the very fancy XQD or CFast cards that have to go into that camera because the camera has to write at such a high bit rate because it's a 100 megapixel camera. It's writing 100 megapixel photo files, so you have to have the storage that can A, write it, and B, store it. And if you're going to be doing long mapping missions, you're probably going to be shooting 200 to 300 to 400 gigabytes a day. So storage is always a factor that comes into play, especially when doing mapping, this one takes it by like times 10, just because of how much storage you need to have on hand to accommodate just everything that you do. Luckily for me, all the stuff that I was doing was not super massive jobs. Like I said, the one job that I did was about, I'd say about 80 gigs, which typically for something like this would be about like 20. So it is a pretty big factor to consider when getting something like this. But again, you just have to assume that buying something like this, you're gonna have to buy all these other accessories. It's not just a plug and play, it's everything else that comes with it. So my overall thoughts for testing out this phase 1 system, honestly, it's a 10 out of 10. I mean, I come from a production background. I come from playing with really cool cameras and different kinds of systems. So having the opportunity, and thanks again to the guys over at phase 1, especially Nick, you are a saint. Thank you so much for letting me play with this system for about a week. But yeah, basically my overall thoughts, this is such a great system to have in your back pocket, especially if what you do requires very high quality imagery. For us, it's that ortho mosaics that we present to our clients. This thing saved me a ton of time and probably definitely a ton of money, because I would have had to pay some of the pilots for some of these sites that I went and did upwards of like 10 grand just because of how long they would have had to sit out at the site. So I think this system definitely helped me out. It was definitely a great proof of concept to not only show my company, ID Plans, kind of the capabilities of what this system can do, but even some of the untapped potential of what this camera can put us into, right? We focus so heavily in the shopping centers and the industrial real estate that there's other industries that we can jump into. We have the fleet of guys that can go and capture very high quality data, but what's keeping all of us behind is just systems like this. We're just so used to having a 20 megapixel sensor on our drones that we often forget that there's more that we can do if we have the other tool sets in our pocket to do so. So for me, I think this would be a perfect buy for those of you that rely on capturing very high quality data, but also saving a lot of time and potentially even saving a lot of money. Overall, 10 out of 10, I definitely recommend this. And I'm super excited to play with some of the other systems from phase 1. Those guys are really cool. I'd highly recommend you guys check them out. I'll link some stuff in the description below. If you stayed this long, thanks for watching. Please drop a like so I can continue making more cool videos like this, playing with different systems. If you guys could please check out the guys over at phase 1, definitely my guy Nick. I'm gonna throw his contact down below in the description so you guys can go reach out to him, and he'll answer all your questions about what they do and what they offer. Otherwise, if you enjoy this, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.